2020, what a year. Aside from the pandemic, civil rights protests, and the unorthodox presidential election, this year will likely also be remembered for the rapid acceptance of psychedelics in mainstream culture. Here at Lucid News, we've gone and summarized the top 12 things that went down in 2020. Number 1, landmark decriminalization passes in cities and states throughout the U.S. Following in the footsteps of Denver, Oakland, and Santa Cruz, Ann Arbor, Oregon, and Washington, D.C. passed initiatives and resolutions this year to decriminalize plant medicines and drugs. Number 2, Oregon voters made psilocybin therapy legal. Measure 109 has made Oregon the first U.S. state to legalize psilocybin for therapeutic use, aiming to make it available to the public by 2023. Number 3, Compass Pathways goes public on the NASDAQ. Compass Pathways, the UK company that patented a synthetic version of psilocybin for use in treatment-resistant depression, is the first psychedelic company to go public on the NASDAQ, raising $146.5 million and later placing the company's market cap north of $2 billion. Number 4, the House approved a cannabis decriminalization bill that acknowledges the racist war on drugs and would release thousands of people from prison. On December 4th, the House of Representatives voted to approve the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement MORE Act, a bill that, if passed in the Senate, would federally decriminalize cannabis and release people arrested for cannabis offenses from prison. Number 5, patients facing death are granted access to psilocybin therapy in Canada. 4 terminally ill cancer patients were approved to use psilocybin to treat end-of-life distress in Canada this August, marking the first legal use of psychedelics in the country in nearly half a century. Number 6, Black Lives Matter protests against police violence highlight deadly drug policies. The protests included demonstrations against the deaths of Elijah McClain, a 23-year-old black man who died after being placed in a chokehold and injected with ketamine by paramedics, and Breonna Taylor, a black frontline healthcare worker who died when police used a no-knock warrant to justify breaking down Taylor's door in the middle of the night. The social justice movement of 2020 intensified demands to hold law enforcement organizations accountable for the deaths of Taylor, McClain, and many other victims of police brutality and systemic racism. Number 7, North Star amplifies conversations about psychedelic business ethics. As the psychedelic space has begun its transformation into a dynamic business sector, many veterans of psychedelic communities have become concerned about the commodification of psychedelics. In response, the nonprofit organization North Star launched a series of conversations in 2020 about the future of psychedelic healing and ethical, equitable, and accessible models for delivering these services. Number 8, DARPA plans to develop trip-free psychedelics to treat mental health. The Defense Advanced Research Project Agency, DARPA, funded plans to develop a new class of psychotherapeutic drugs from psychedelic compounds that treat mental health conditions without the psychoactive effects. Number 9, hard science brings clear guidelines to psychedelic-assisted therapies. Research and studies that stood out in 2020 include Imperial College's paper outlining a new model for approaching psychedelic-assisted therapy, the Cold Spring Harbor laboratory study on the effects of external stimulation on the psychedelic state neurodynamics, and the European Journal of Psychotraumatology study that examines how couples with one partner suffering from PTSD respond to MDMA-assisted therapy. Number 10, President-elect Joe Biden advocates for drug law reform. After years of spearheading legislation that helped fuel the war on drugs and mass incarceration, President-elect Joe Biden made drug law reform part of his platform during the 2020 presidential race. Biden has been trying to reverse his own policies for more than a decade, especially the RAVE Act and the Anti-Drug Abuse Act of 1986, which Biden sponsored and partially wrote. Number 11, MAPS raises a record amount of money in nonprofit donations for psychedelic research. In August, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, MAPS, announced that they raised $30 million in nonprofit donations to fuel the last stretch of research needed for FDA approval of MDMA-assisted psychotherapy for the treatment of PTSD. This unprecedented success is a beacon for the rapidly growing acceptance of psychedelics into the mainstream. Number 12, the pandemic creates an explosion of psychedelic culture online. In this long, strange trip that has been the year 2020, COVID-19 shut down physical gatherings for an indeterminate amount of time, forcing psychedelic communities to find new ways to connect and journey together, which for many meant turning to cyberspace. Burning Man moved to exist virtually as the multiverse. Conferences such as Chacruna's Psychedelic Liberty Summit and ICPR's 2020 became multi-day virtual events. Horizon, one of the longest-running psychedelic conferences, transformed into digital films, forums, and classes accessible throughout the year. Louis Schwartzberg's movie Fantastic Fungi release moved online, and the anniversary of Terence McKenna's birthday became a 3-day virtual fireside chat. Psychedelic communities became even stronger and more connected, with psychedelic groups like the Sabina Project holding virtual events to support BIPOC and educate all on diversifying the psychedelic space, and local psychedelic societies held weekly Zoom integration circles and happy hours to provide support to their communities and beyond. That's it for 2020. Looking forward to seeing what 2021 has in store. Wishing you such a happy new year. This is Marisa from Lucid News.